Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Anyone that has even a little bit of interest in geopolitics in the last couple of days have been paying attention to the Davos World Economic Forum that was happening, where a lot of the world leaders came out, made statements, made some very interesting proclamations, and generally we had sort of like a vibe check. Where are we now? And what do we expect? And firstly, I want to address Trump, because I explained that on this channel I cover Donald Trump only as much as it matters for Ukraine, which is, to be honest, not a lot. And I explained this already plenty. Because he is kind of a person that just sucks all of the air out of the room, and you will see that anyone that is covering Davos is covering what exactly Donald Trump said there. And while it is relevant for people that are involved, and I know that there is a lot of people that made career just talking about Trump, this is not me. I am talking about Ukraine. And Ukraine-wise, there wasn't a lot with Donald Trump. There was a discussion between him and President Zelensky, but that was about it. No major progress was made. As far as I understood, President Zelensky wanted Trump to commit to provide security guarantees with concrete ratification inside of Congress, which was sort of like rejected or not fully agreed with Trump yet. Therefore, it was a nothing burger. In any case, President Zelensky in his speech did talk a lot about defense of Ukraine. More importantly, he talked specifically about Europe. It was arguably one of the most critical speeches about Europe to date. And it was super passionate. It was really fantastic. It really was up my alley. I can guarantee you that every single one of you that are watching this video will go and see video by Zelensky, and you will feel inspired. You will feel the commitment. You will feel that this is the way to go and to do things. But I'm going to spoil a little bit of this, because it was not that what President Zelensky said was wrong. I think he was right. He was super right for critiquing Europeans for inaction and our problems. It was more the response of the Europeans that saddened me. Because I've heard statements, and statements were very nice. We must never be slaves. We need to be strong. We will raise our security as we have raised our security beforehand, and so on, and so on, and so on. And my problem is that I've seen it all before, and that feeling just couldn't escape me. Because these statements about how Russia is a danger to Europe have been voiced already by Baltics long before things started happening in Ukraine. I know Ukraine right now is the front runner, absolute no doubt. But the Baltics were already there. They already tried to communicate a lot of those messages that President Zelensky is stating here to Europe beforehand. And they got very similar responses. They've gotten these words of commitment, the words of support, stating that everything is going to be okay. But in their eyes, you could read that there is no dedication, that they look at Zelensky and say like, well, you're definitely a true leader. You're the person that is someone that we should have more of and people should aspire to be at. But also deep inside, they would be like, but you're a little bit too naive. You just don't know how complicated it is inside of Europe. This internal kind of predefined dismissal that, things are that's not how the things work around here sort of a way. I'm pretty sure if you worked in any kind of company and if you met people that had some kind of a way of doing things, even if you come and you point out and say that this is absolutely wrong, they would kind of like, what do you know? Despite the fact that you might be absolutely right and you have all of the evidence. But because there is this archaic tradition that is still set in stone, this is what I feel President Zelensky is right now receiving. Don't get me wrong, the words of support will be there. It's going to be commitment and so on. What is not going to be coming out of this, I believe, is major action. Just because I seen it all before, exactly in the phrases, in the movements, the handshakes, and more importantly, in actions, or rather inactions coming from the Europeans. So the outcome of negotiations between President Zelensky and Trump was a new round of political peace talk nonsense. Unfortunately, it's like coming once again to our doorstep, where Witkoff and Kushner are going to be trying to persuade Ukraine to give up land. This was stated by Steve Witkoff with no kind of real regards to anything else. And it's absolutely clear that both Kushner and Witkoff absolutely do not understand what kind of war it is, what is it being fight for, and so on. Because in his statements, Steve Witkoff have been underscoring that they were able to boil down this discussion of peace talks to one specific issue only, which everyone understood what was implied. It is for Ukraine to go out of Donbass, which is an absolute non-starter for so many reasons, because we've heard everything already before. We heard all of the movements. The current negotiations teams from Russia is Dmitriev, and well, they removed now Medinsky, who was like a nobody, so they put in another nobody in. Right now they put a deputy to the Russian, I believe, Minister of Defense. Like, let's put it very clear, in Russia, if you're not number one, then you're nobody. So if you're not Putin, I mean, like, if you're a minister, like the closest, the first person after Putin, maybe you have some say. But there is no chain of command after this. This is not like someone gets a mandate. That's not how it works. This is an absolutely different regime here. And the fact that they sent just another nobody instead of previously just underscores there is absolutely no value in these negotiations whatsoever. The only reason why Russia is still trying to push for Ukraine to kind of get out of Donbass is because they understand that this is the point that is the most unacceptable for Ukraine, that Ukraine will not give up their land. So it's a perfect vehicle for them to continue the charade. That the fact that Putin rejected all of these points that were negotiated between European allies and United States were rejected even without consideration is not even bothering, like not even in one eye. Witkoff and Dmitriev and Kushner are even considering that there could be some kind of a commitment. It is absolutely clear that this is a non-starter. And again, I saw like all of these journalists that were there present and talked to, ask questions, asking is like, oh, is the deal soon to be done? It's just baffles me how things that are so on the surface just can be ignored, and we again go into this another round of propaganda and non-propaganda, just idiotic media publishing articles stating, oh, another talks put Zelensky in difficult position. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed for Zelensky. The only kind of new approval, not approval, but the detail that was proposed supposedly is that if Ukraine will withdraw from Donbass, then Trump is stating that there's going to be 800 billion US dollars as investment into Ukraine, sort of like a bribe to get rid of Donbass for Ukraine, which is like, it's a non-starter. Because it is clear that it's not going to be United States that's going to be paying those 800 billions, right? Let's not joke ourselves that it's going to be United States that's going to pay Ukraine 800 billions. It's going to be the Europeans. It's very clearly like it's a joke. It's just insane joke. But I also want to talk about the things that Europeans are good at. Like, yes, Europeans are really bad at solving problems here and now, but they're pretty good at trying to solve problems that will be there coming in the future, maybe at some point. So the Viktor Orban right now is in his full re-election campaign. So our most favorite pig dolphin right over here is trying to portray Ukraine as this bane that is going to be becoming of European Union to his electorate, and he shed some light on some of the things that Europeans are planning for Ukraine. Orban kind of painted very clearly that Ukraine will receive 1.6 trillion US dollars, and they will force it on all of the citizens of Europe and citizens of Hungary as a tax sort of for Ukraine, which is absolutely not the case, but it's important to read between the lines here, because this, together with some of the statements that other Europeans have been talking about, they are trying to now reintroduce the accession process for the countries. Sort of like the country joins the European Union, and beforehand it was like the country needed to discuss, like I believe it was 32 or 27, no 32, it was 32 different chapters of alignment between the European Union and a state before the country could join the European Union. Now, the new proposed mechanism is like the country kind of joins the European Union. It's just as the chapters are getting closed, more and more integration is happening between the country and the European Union. Sort of like, not that you get the whole thing at the end, but as you go, you kind of just get approved. And the important part here is the 1.6 trillion US dollars. I believe this could be very close to the number that is actually proposed for Ukraine. Ukraine is a huge country, and this is pretty much in their target. What is more importantly in this 1.6 trillion, this is the EU funds that are being sort of like proposed. Every EU country knows what EU funds is. It's projects that you do inside of your country to try to get your country up to the level of other European states. This has benefited Poland a lot, the Baltics a lot of the countries. Like, you would travel around Europe, you will see like this has been built with the help of the European Union. They help co-finance projects inside of the state, and those are usually starting to be available to the countries as countries become more integrated with Europe. So the good news is, I think that there is already draft for this money to be coming to Ukraine, and more importantly, this funds could be made available as Ukraine will start closing some of these chapters that Ukraine has been working through, including, for example, the chapter on corruption, where in the recent couple of weeks and actually months, Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies have been just stellar at weeding out a lot of the top-level corruption, which is absolutely fantastic. But there is one thing that both Europeans and Americans are doing great nonetheless, is supporting Ukraine. Guys, I want to say huge thanks for continuing support for the fundraiser. It is really incredible how well we are doing. I know January is a hard month for everyone. And more importantly, all of the people that try to help this fundraiser by purchasing some bottles of sparkling wine from Ukraine. Well, we have good news. Finally, the Art Wine has reached out to me and stated, hey, Georgie, there you go. The Art Wine is actually helping out. So as part of the proceeds from their side, over $3,000 have now been deposited to the fundraiser. Thank you so much to Art Wine, and more importantly, thank you so much to you for continuing support and trust in Ukraine. Let's continue on. Then there is the article like this that defines that the rate of recruitment of contract soldiers has been declining in Russia. And this is by the Russian media agency Verska and the Russian, I don't want to call opposition because there is no Russian opposition per se, but Putin critical media, let's put it this way. And so this Russian media analyzed the flow of volunteers specifically to the Russian military and general contract numbers that they were able to confirm. Now, this is not an accurate number, and I want to be very, very clear, especially because we've heard other sources claiming that Russia was still fulfilling their goals with recruitment campaigns. But what is interesting here is the actual more of a, you know, there is like when you're doing statistics, you have quantitative statistics, like how many people are, for example, choosing like red over blue, sort of like this quantitative statistics. But there is also a research that can be considered like a qualitative research in academia. And the qualitative research is when you might not have this such a big of a sample, but you ask, for example, 3 people or like 10 people that liked the color red, and you try to ask them, well, why did you like the color red? Do you like, is it practically applicable, or you didn't like it this way? So it's different things that it can bring to you. So, and in this case, while I am not as quick to start yelling, well, hooray, Russia is struggling with recruiting their soldiers, I am more interested in that qualitative aspect of the research that was done. Specifically, they outlined that the quality of the troops that are being now recruited has fallen significantly, that a lot of them are very, very much in their 50s already, that a lot of them are not fit to be in the military service. And more importantly, they also outlined that there is a decrease inside of the bigger capital cities such as Moscow, despite the fact that there was a pretty big signing bonus introduced in a lot of these regions. I've outlined already that despite the fact that we're thinking that Russia has infinite resources and manpower, they don't. That it is going to be defining how people inside of these capital regions will feel to continue this war. And for me, this qualitative aspect specifically, that there is a lower quality of troops, that the volunteers are not really the ones that the people need, and the ones, for example, that really have trouble learning how to fight this war. The mineral deal that we already discussed so heavily when the Trump came into office now is bringing some first benefits. There are now reports that on the sidelines to the World Economic Forum in Davos discussion, if we kind of drop the political aspects, there are also important business deals being made, and specifically here are the first projects being submitted by Ukraine to this fund, and now they're being evaluated by the US investors. So we might see finally the co-investment between Ukraine and United States actually benefiting Ukraine and bringing in the funds that Ukraine needs so much to start doing things on the ground. I always underscored that capitalism, the systems that we live in, are running on these intertangible assets. And despite the fact that we have a weird situation in our political leadership, it is the economic ties that are defining us first and foremost. So finally getting this connection with Ukraine, that Ukraine is not just a country that is just asking for help, but there is more of an economic entanglement. This is always going to be good news in the long run. And to finishing up on probably the most important news long term that we all are monitoring is what is happening inside of Ukraine's government. Now, as you know, there has been a change of Minister of Defense. The new one is Mikhailo Fedorov. I have really high expectations for him. And we always wanted to find out who is going to be inside of Fedorov's team. And now we got some additional answers. Now, some of you might know Serhiy Sternenko. He's a pro-Ukrainian activist that have been trying to fight the Russification of his country forever. Now, some of you might even hear something bad about him, but that is mostly because you listen to Russian propaganda. The guy is pretty nice and has been pretty consistent in his support for Ukraine ever since, like forever, since I remember, and so on. And especially starting the war in 2014, and he actually even joined the defense forces when the Russians invaded around Kyiv. Since then, he became a machine on fundraising for drones. He has supplied, I believe, almost as much drones, I want to say, as some of the countries in Europe combined. Incredible contribution by the guy and how much he was able to achieve. And he has now been introduced to be an advisor in the cabinet of Fedorov. Now, why this is important? Well, because you see the headline. He is a staunch critic of the political and governance system of Ukraine. His motto is, we either change or die, or lose, you can say. And this has been like very prominent. He has been not just criticizing Ukrainian government, which a lot of Ukrainians do, he has always put forward some kind of a proper proposals for the change. So the fact of the matter is, if this is the caliber of people that are now being introduced into the advisory positions or in the positions of deputies for Fedorov's cabinet, I do believe that we are very much on the right track to see important changes to Ukraine. So good news all in all, and this will indeed bring closer the finish of this war rather than some kind of a bullshit non-negotiations that is propagated by some people. In any case, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting Ukraine. I appreciate it so much. Ukraine appreciates it so much. Trust in Ukraine, trust in Ukrainian armed forces. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.